Heroin. We have all heard the word, or maybe more commonly, the opioid epidemic. But what exactly are these words? Heroin is one of the most addicting drugs out there, and with it being so easily obtainable, 1 in 4 people who are exposed to the drug for the first time become addicted. Many addictions actually begin with prescription drugs, such as Oxycontin and Vicodin, that have similar effects to heroin. But once this prescription runs out, addicts turn to more easily accessible drugs. But although this is a leading link to addictions, only about 4% of prescription users turn, suggesting that opioid use is only one factor. Today, I am joined by Hunter Farmer, as well as his clinical director, Michelle Heins, to discuss the way that this outbreak of popularity of narcotics has affected our home, Pittsburgh, and answer some questions we all have on the effects of the body and what exactly happens during treatment. Mr. Farmer works in a rehabilitation center in Bridgeville and is here to inform us on all the connections to addiction. My name is Jaiden Tabor, and welcome to another episode of The Edge. Thank you guys for coming today. So first thing I'd like to touch upon is how you guys got involved, both of you, in this kind of line of work and industry. If you wanna.
Well, in 2006, I became aware that there was a big need for treatment and an unmet need for treatment in the Pittsburgh area because of the rising use of opioids. So I reached out to a fellow Peters Township resident, Tim Grealish, who was well known in the treatment arena, and we were on our way. It was not easy. It took about 3 years to open the program, but we opened Freedom Healthcare in 2009.
Wow. And for you?
So when I graduated with my bachelor's degree in psychology, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. Kind of looked into a couple different things, ended up getting a job in a methadone clinic, and really liked working with the population and helping them to change their lives. So it was kind of like I fell into it and ended up being a good fit for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I know we talked about you guys having a treatment center in Bridgeville, and it's called Freedom Healthcare System. So Services. I'm sorry. So what exactly do you guys do there?
Well, we are an outpatient treatment provider, so nobody sleeps over. Mm-hmm. We provide counseling and medication-assisted treatment, specifically utilizing Suboxone to treat opioid use disorder or heroin addiction or any other opioid use.
Mm-hmm. As well as Vivitrol. We also utilize Vivitrol, which is an injectable for opioid use as well.
Okay, awesome. So, how do you guys help families deal with the concerns that they're having when they come to you guys?
So usually we encourage the patients to bring family members in. It's always a good idea to have family members come in and get educated. But also, the addiction affects the whole family, so it's not just affecting the person using, it's affecting everybody around them that's part of their lives. So it's really important for them to get help as well. So, for people that are using, there's AA and NA meetings. For family members, there's Al-Anon and Nar-Anon. It's important for them to get help and to be able to get that support for themselves to help them through this time.
And also, it's really important to educate the family that this is a brain disease. It's not a character flaw. It's not bad moral character. And helping them understand that we have to treat this like a disease, and it's a lifelong disease, and not something that will be over soon.
Right. So what is one of the most common reasons that you see people seeking help? Like, what is the breaking point for people to come to you guys?
I think it's usually just they're ready to stop. They're tired of the lifestyle. I mean, it's exhausting figuring out every morning where you're going to get stuff, being sick all the time. And usually they're calling us because they're just tired and they don't want to live like this anymore. So they're ready for that change. Our patients come to us voluntarily. They're calling us to come in and get help. And so I think that's the way the vast majority of people are coming to us, because they're just ready.
Yeah.
Some others will have legal issues. Mm-hmm. Obviously, they get arrested, they get DUIs, they get caught by loved ones. They are given ultimatums by loved ones. If you don't go to help, I'm leaving you, or I'm throwing you out of the house, or whatever. Right. Consequences there may be.
Right.
So I know that just from doing my research and everything that a lot of times people lose motivation. So what are some of the things that you guys do to encourage your patients to stay motivated to get better and get help and finish the treatment?
I think just really focusing on the change. When they come into treatment and they get clean, things start to look better in their lives. So really focusing on the positive. Some people are in situations where they're losing their children, and getting clean helps them start to get their kids back. They start to mend relationships with family and friends, and they have these positive people in their life again. So really focusing on the positive changes that they're making, and moving forward with that.
Right. So if you guys want to touch upon a common treatment plan that you guys have when patients come to you.
So usually whenever people come to us, our primary focus when they come in the door is just that we're getting them clean, so that they're not using any more illicit drugs, and that's the first step. So sometimes, that takes, and depending on who that person is and what their situation is, some people are going to get clean quicker than others. So that's our primary focus. And then we really focus on what they want to work on. So sometimes, initially it's getting a job, or, working on the family relationships that I talked about. So we really individualize it on what's going to be a good fit for them and, what they would like to work on.
Right. So one of the other things that I wanted to talk about was how the opioid epidemic is affecting Washington, Allegheny, and Pittsburgh as a whole, and what are some of the effects that it's having on our city?
Well, there are many different effects. There are wide-scale effects such as crime. It's a health crisis. It increases the occurrence of Hep C and HIV through intravenous drug use. People are breaking into cars to steal change and other items they can get just to support their daily habits. So this is happening on a daily basis. Then you have the effect on families and loved ones. And, I know a story about a kid that went to school here who stole his sister's iPod on Christmas Day to go sell it so he could feed his drug addiction.
Right.
So, it affects people, at all levels. Yeah. And it's a crisis everywhere.
Right. So how is the opioid epidemic getting worse?
So I think that it's probably getting worse because fentanyl is more prevalent. So fentanyl is a much stronger opioid. So that's why a couple years ago we started seeing the increase in people overdosing, because it takes a lot less of fentanyl than heroin or Oxycontin or Vicodin to overdose on it. So that's why we saw a spike in the overdoses, and drug dealers are doing things like buying pill presses and taking fentanyl and pressing it into pill form and selling it, not as fentanyl, but just as an opioid pill, or maybe they're marketing it for Oxycontin. So, it makes it much more dangerous because people don't know what they're taking. And sometimes fentanyl is also laced in bags of heroin. So we have patients come in all the time that's their first appointment. We do a urine screen on them. They're positive for fentanyl. They didn't even know they ingested fentanyl. So it's becoming much more dangerous in that way.
Right. So go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, additionally, the use of Narcan, which has been a wonderful reversal drug that has saved countless lives. People who are overdosing, and emergency responders use Narcan to reverse the overdose. We're also putting Narcan into the hands of users and users' immediate family and other people that they hang out with. But we've had police officers say because people have Narcan, they can reverse the overdose themselves, and so law enforcement doesn't get involved. So there's a whole faction of people that are using that law enforcement isn't aware of.
Right. So on the Narcan note, are there other ways that the opioid epidemic is actually getting better?
I think we see signs that it's getting better. I think more and more people are aware of just how bad it is and what an opioid is. I mean, even 3 or 4 years ago, they didn't realize that something they could get at their local pharmacy was the same as heroin. Like you said at the opening, Vicodin, Percocet, those are very similar to heroin and just as dangerous. But I think people think that because they know the doctor that prescribed this to a parent for a toothache, they think it's safe, and it's not.
And I think also there's a lot more options for treatment now.
Right.
There's a lot more treatment centers out there, and there's a lot more places that people can go, both inpatient and outpatient, to get the help that they need. So I think that that's definitely a way that things have improved and more people are able to get clean.
And I think it's important to recognize it's being destigmatized. When we opened, it was very difficult for us to even get open because of NIMBY not in my backyard. People wanted a treatment center, but not in their community.
Right.
And people were afraid to seek treatment because they didn't want to go to rehab. Now, I think it's more commonly accepted that it's okay to go to treatment.
Yeah.
And the stigma is being lifted, which is making people more willing to go to treatment.
Right. So I know you talked about fentanyl, and I wanted to talk about how the opioid epidemic is actually evolving and just changing altogether, and how it's getting worse from 10 years ago to now.
I'll start. I think a lot of people think that heroin is coming in from Mexico and coming in from China, from Afghanistan, when in fact most heroin and fentanyl now is coming in through the mail from China. The people and the dealers, the distribution networks are getting smarter and smarter, and there's always going to be a demand for it, and they're gonna figure out how to outsmart law enforcement. So I think that's one of the biggest things that, especially the Chinese fentanyl coming in.
Yeah, it just makes everything more dangerous, not just for the people that are using, but for family members, for law enforcement. Because the fentanyl and the carfentanil now is coming in, which is even more potent than fentanyl. And you have police officers that are going into homes and if you come in contact with it, you have the potential to overdose. So it's just much more dangerous.
How is fentanyl different than heroin on the effects of the body?
It's just stronger.
It's stronger. It works quicker.
I've drawn an analogy, like if a heroin addict thinks he's taking heroin and he takes fentanyl, it will be the equivalent of somebody thinking they're drinking a beer and drinking a case of beer all at once, and they don't know it's coming. So their body's not ready for it, and that's what's causing the overdoses and the more deaths.
Right. So how do they, if they don't overdose, how do they end up figuring out that they ended up ingesting fentanyl?
They usually don't. I think that's the scary part. They don't know that. So they think they're buying just heroin from, their regular dealer, and, that dealer has decided to start lacing it with fentanyl. And many times they don't know like that. Like I said, we have people that come in for treatment and they are under the impression that they are just using heroin, and we do a drug test on them and they're positive for fentanyl, and they had no idea that they ingested fentanyl.
Right. So we're going to take a short break. Thank you so much for watching our first half of the show. We are going to take a short break, but when we return, we will continue to discuss the signs of heroin use and what we can do to help someone we might suspect is using. Welcome back to our second half of the show. So one of the things I wanted to touch upon in the second half is how does the heroin, opioid, fentanyl, all those things that we talked about have long-term effects on our bodies after long use or even just short use?
I think there's a lot of different things that it affects your body. I mean, initially when you're getting addicted, it's definitely affecting your brain and your brain chemistry, because it is a disease. It can also affect your body in so many ways. If you're IV using, we have a lot of patients that have like collapsed veins. If you miss, it can affect your heart. There's just so many things that it can affect your health and physical health.
As soon as you get into any kind of intravenous or IV drug use, injecting, you bring in the possibility of contracting hepatitis A, B, C, HIV, TB. I think it's important to acknowledge that you do not make good decisions when you're using. You have multiple sex partners who have STDs, things like that. Most of our patients who are long-term users look a lot older than they are, and they're worn out, they're tired. It's not glamorous, I assure you.
Yeah.
I know that when the opioid epidemic first began, HIV was a big link to one of the side effects of using. How is that changing or getting better? Is it only from sharing needles?
You can get it from sharing needles. I think more prevalent is Hep C. So there's more people that are getting Hep C from sharing needles. I mean, that's why programs like Prevention Point in Pittsburgh that hand out clean needles, where people, if they're going to continue using, they can go and get clean needles. Things like that are helping to not spread disease if people don't want to get treatment or aren't ready to get clean. But yeah, Hep C is more prevalent than HIV is, at least what we're seeing.
Right. So programs like that where they're handing out needles, do you feel like that's better or worse for the epidemic?
It's better for not the spread of disease. It's not for spreading disease.
Right.
So we can't force people to get clean. They have to be ready. They have to want treatment and to want to change their life. So if they're not ready for that yet, this is a place where they can at least be safe, or safer than they were being when they were sharing needles with 2 or 3 different people.
Right.
It's like a harm reduction model.
Yeah.
We can't begin to think that everybody's going to stop because they know they should. Look at cigarettes. Everybody who smokes knows it's not good for them.
Right.
So it's just giving people clean needles to avoid transmission of disease.
Right.
Yeah.
So when people come to the Bridgeville Treatment Center, what kind of condition are they in with the things that have been affecting them on their body?
So whenever they're coming to us, primarily they're coming in for Suboxone treatment, and so we require them to come in withdrawal. So they have to be sick. So they have to not used whatever opioid they were using, so heroin or a pain pill, Vicodin, Percocet, Oxycontin, for at least 24 hours. Because they have to be in withdrawal for us to prescribe them medication. So they're sick when they come to us.
Yeah.
They don't feel well. Withdrawal symptoms mimic a flu, only you would multiply your symptoms of a flu times like 100.
Right.
So they're not feeling well. They're pretty sick. Like Hunter said, a lot of them look older than they really are, just because using drugs is taxing on your body, and so you are appearing older and you're aging quicker. So other things would be, some people don't take care of their dental hygiene. So we have patients that have their teeth are rotting, some have fallen out, and that's not a side effect of heroin. That's just because they are getting high and they're not taking care of themselves.
Yeah.
They're not showering and brushing their teeth and doing things that we normally do on a daily basis.
I think it's important to point out that people don't go from normal life to the condition they're in when they come in. Most people don't come into treatment as soon as they need it.
Yeah.
So, they may have been using for 2 or 3 years to go from, they were in college to then they dropped out of college, then they get kicked out of their house. Now they're, couch surfing, and now they're homeless, and, they live a homeless lifestyle, and then they finally go, enough is enough, and they come in. So, it doesn't look terrible
Initially,
early on.
yeah.
I mean, people use because they like it, but once you become addicted, you have to use more and more and more to sustain the same, high, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
And it just becomes a chase. You're always trying to find your dealer, and you're exhausted. And so their lives are in complete disarray and chaotic when they come in.
Yeah.
Well, and like Hunter said, at some point, they started using because they liked it. They like how they felt. So it was fun initially, and then it stopped being fun. And so when they're coming to us, it's not fun anymore. And they're to the point where they're using just to not be sick on a daily basis. It's not about getting high anymore. It's just about, I don't want to be sick.
Right.
While we're on that, a lot of people use initially and continue to use because it's they're self-medicating a mental health problem. A lot of users have a history of depression, anxiety,
trauma,
shyness even. Dr. Capretta, who recently passed away and was the medical director of Gateway, he said, a kid took a pill at a high school dance, and he was always shy and a wallflower, and all of a sudden he was comfortable talking to girls, and so he started taking more of them, and there's a lot of things that occur that lead down this path, and
right.
So
I know you touched upon withdrawal, but is detox the same thing as withdrawal, or are they different?
So detox is something that you go somewhere to do.
Okay.
So withdrawal is whenever the drug starts to wear off and you
Okay.
start to get sick.
Right.
And like I said, it's like mimicking flu symptoms. So you have a fever, vomiting, diarrhea, cold sweats. A lot of people have like muscle twitches, runny nose. So it really mimics that. So detox is when you go into a facility like Gateway, Greenbrier, White Deer Run, and you stay there for 5 to 7 days, and they give you some comfort medications to help you get off of the drug. That's what detox is.
and some people detox in jail, which is no
Yes.
fun at all.
Right.
Because they don't give you anything.
Right. That's just basically curled up in the fetal position in the corner, sweating it out. And it's, I mean, the expression is, it won't kill you, but you wish it did.
Yeah. So how long does it take for the drugs to completely bypass the body?
It depends how much you were using and how often.
Right.
So typically, whenever someone goes in for a detox, they're there 5 to 7 days at least.
And all the same, or do the symptoms progressively get better?
They progressively get better as the drug leaves your body.
Right.
But yeah,
It's still miserable.
yes, it is.
So one of the other things I wanted to talk about is how can someone like me, who I don't work around people like that, how can I tell if somebody is using?
So a real easy like physical thing is whenever somebody's using an opioid, their eyes are, we call it pinned. So that means their pupils are very, very small, like the size of a pin. So that's an easy way to tell just by looking at somebody's eyes if they're using an opioid or not. But the rest of it is pretty much behavioral.
Right.
So, if things start going missing, like Hunter talked about, or their behaviors are off, sometimes when they're coming down off of it, like they're starting to get sick, they're more irritated. So it's a lot more behavioral stuff than physical.
Right. So what are some of the emotional aspects of opioid use that I can look out for, or anyone can look out for in that kind of aspect? Like the emotion, like are they dangerous to be around? Are they like short-tempered, angry? Like what are some of the emotional side effects?
I don't know if there's necessarily emotional side effects of heroin use. I think that for a lot of people, using opioids actually stuffs their emotion and it numbs them. And sometimes that's why people use, because they've been through something really traumatic and they don't want to feel. So usually they're not really in touch with their emotions at all. That's actually something that we work on when they get clean that first few months, because they're really having this rush of emotions come back, and that can be really overwhelming.
Right.
But it does, people's priorities change. I mean, you'll see that. I mean, the love of their life becomes the drug they're addicted to. So,
Right.
relationships will fall apart, things like that, because they're solely focused on using the drugs, seeking the drugs.
So I know that relapse is a really common factor when going through treatment. So why is that? Why is it so hard for people to just stick to it at once?
So you have to kind of think about it as you're rewiring your brain. So you've been living a certain way for 2 or 3 years, and that certain way is your life revolves around this drug. Everything you do all day, from the time you wake up to the time you go to sleep, all you're thinking about is, how am I going to get it? How am I going to pay for it? And that's really anxiety producing and stressful. And also, when people come into treatment, everybody pretty much in their lives that they're close with at that point, if it's not family that have stuck with them and tried to help them, are all using also. So when people come into treatment, we're asking them to essentially change everything. So you can't talk to any of your friends anymore. You need to change your phone number. Maybe you have to move. That's a lot of things to do at once. You think about changing one thing, like starting a new job. That's stressful enough changing that one thing, but we're asking them to change everything in their whole entire lives. So that can be really overwhelming and hard. And you know, sometimes then you run into an old friend and maybe you didn't always just use with them. Maybe you guys had a good time together at some point. And so you start hanging out with them and then they pull drugs out. And it's hard to say no.
Yeah.
And then you end up using.
Right.
So it's situations like that, you know, that trigger people to relapse. You know, and stress is a big one too, because you forget how to deal with life and when bad things happen.
Yeah.
So when you have something stressful happen, you know, learning how to deal with that in a healthy way and not just go and get high instead.
Right.
Another point, if you think of an upside down bell curve, and you know, on this side is normal, okay, and then on the other side at the top is in total recovery. So and the bottom of the bell curve is what was known as rock bottom, okay? So when somebody is in recovery and they use, they don't go back to like the top of the other side. They are almost at rock bottom as soon as they use again, and they get right back into their addiction very quickly, yeah.
So we're actually out of time, so thank you so much for being here, Mr. Farmer and Mrs. Heins. You have informed us with tons of great facts about the opioid epidemic in our home. Many families have unfortunately faced the epidemic and many homes have been negatively affected. Roughly 21 to 29% of opioid prescribed patients misuse them. But knowing the effects of these drugs is only the beginning. Together we can band together to put this epidemic to an end. And although the end might not be exactly near in sight, there are many steps we can take to help. If you or a loved one are affected by the epidemic, please use the hotline on the screen or call the phone number for more information. Thank you so much for watching Peters Township.